At 65, all I could do was work. My daughter-in-law treated me like a servant, and my son confiscated my salary. They forced me to sleep in the garage all winter. Suspicious, my billionaire boss followed me. When he saw my bed through the window, he cried and did something that changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rosalind, and at 65 years old, I never imagined I would be sleeping on a concrete floor in a garage while my own son and daughter-in-law lived comfortably in the house I helped pay for. But that's exactly where I found myself last winter, shivering under a thin blanket that barely covered my arthritic joints. It started 3 years ago when my son Nolan lost his job. I was already working as a housekeeper for Mr. Winston Blackwood, a billionaire who owned several tech companies in the city. The pay was decent, $15 an hour, and Mr. Blackwood was always respectful, never demanding or cruel like some of the wealthy people I'd worked for over the years. When Nolan called me that day, his voice was strained with worry. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but Kala and I are really struggling. The mortgage is behind, and we might lose the house." Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? I moved in with them temporarily, thinking it would just be until Nolan found another position. I started giving them my entire paycheck, $600 a week, keeping only $20 for my personal needs. "Just until we get back on our feet," Nolan promised. But Nolan never seemed to look very hard for work. And Kala treated me like hired help from the moment I walked through their door. "Rosalind, the kitchen's a mess," she'd call from the living room, never bothering to get up from her position on the couch where she spent most days watching reality TV shows. "And when you're done with that, the bathroom needs cleaning." I bit my tongue. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself I was helping my family. The garage situation started 6 months ago. Kala announced she was converting my small bedroom into a home office for her business ventures, which seemed to consist mainly of buying and reselling beauty products online, though I never saw much actual selling happening. "Don't worry, Rosalind," Kala said with that sweet smile that never reached her eyes. "The garage is heated. You'll be fine out there until we figure something else out." But the heating barely worked. The concrete floor was cold and damp, and the single small window was cracked, letting in frigid air all winter long. I slept on an old mattress that smelled of mildew, covered by whatever blankets I could find in the house when Kala wasn't looking. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5:30 to get ready for work at Mr. Blackwood's estate. My joints ached from the cold and the hard surface I'd slept on. Sometimes my fingers were so stiff I could barely button my uniform, the same 2 white blouses and black pants I'd been wearing for years, washing them by hand in the garage sink because using the house washing machine required asking Kala's permission. Mr. Blackwood's mansion was like stepping into another world. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and warmth, blessed warmth, that wrapped around me like a hug every morning when I walked through the service entrance. The house had 12 rooms, each more beautiful than the last, but I only cleaned the main living areas and Mr. Blackwood's home office. He was a quiet man, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and kind blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. I'd worked for him for 4 years, and he'd never raised his voice at me, never complained about my work, never made me feel small or worthless like some employers did, but lately I could feel his eyes on me more often. I caught him frowning when he thought I wasn't looking, especially on the mornings when I couldn't quite hide how tired I was. "Mrs. Patterson," he said one Tuesday morning as I was dusting his office. He always called me Mrs. Patterson, even though I'd told him years ago that Mr. Patterson had passed away and I'd gone back to my maiden name. "Are you feeling all right? You seem tired lately." My hands paused on the mahogany desk. I forced a smile, the same one I'd been practicing for months. "I'm fine, Mr. Blackwood. Just getting older, you know how it is." He studied my face for a long moment. "Perhaps you should see a doctor. I'd be happy to arrange for you to take time off, with pay, of course." The kindness in his voice almost broke me. I had to turn away, pretending to focus on organizing his papers. "That's very kind, but I'm perfectly fine, really." What could I tell him? That I was sleeping in a garage like a stray dog? That my own son took every penny I earned while his wife treated me like a servant in my own family's home? That some mornings I was so cold I could barely feel my hands, and some nights I cried myself to sleep wondering how my life had come to this? No, I couldn't tell him that. Mr. Blackwood was a good man, but he was my employer, not my friend. My problems weren't his concern. That afternoon, I took the bus home. I'd sold my car to help with Nolan and Calla's expenses 8 months ago. The house looked beautiful from the outside, a charming 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and flower beds. No one would guess that the woman who helped maintain it was living like a homeless person in the garage. I let myself in through the kitchen door, hoping to grab a quick snack before retreating to my cold corner of the garage. But Calla was waiting for me, her arms crossed and her expression thunderous. "Where's this week's money?" she demanded without even a greeting. I pulled the envelope from my purse, $600 in cash, just like every week. Calla snatched it from my hands and counted it twice, as if I might have stolen from my own contribution. "This is all of it?" she asked suspiciously. "Yes, that's everything." She shoved the money into her designer handbag, the same handbag that cost more than I used to make in a month. "Good. Because Nolan and I have been talking, and we think you might need to contribute more. The cost of living is going up, and frankly, having you here is expensive." I stared at her, speechless. Expensive? I bought my own food, did my own laundry, cleaned the house, and gave them every cent I earned except for $20 a week for bus fare and basic necessities. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "How could I contribute more? I already give you my entire paycheck." Calla rolled her eyes. "Maybe you could ask your boss for a raise, or get a second job. You're only working for him 5 days a week. What do you do with your weekends?" What did I do with my weekends? I spent them recovering from the week, trying to warm up in the local library because it was heated, washing my clothes by hand and wondering how I'd ended up in this nightmare. I'll think about it," I managed to say. "Good. Oh, and Rosalind?" Calla's voice turned sickeningly sweet. "I invited the Hendersons over for dinner tomorrow night. Make sure you stay in the garage during their visit. We don't want to have to explain why Nolan's mother is living here like some kind of charity case." Each word was a knife to my heart. I nodded silently and retreated to the garage, where my bed waited, a mattress on the floor next to boxes of Christmas decorations and old lawn equipment. As I lay there that night, listening to the wind whistle through the cracked window, I wondered how I'd become so invisible in my own son's life. When had I stopped being his mother and become just another bill to pay, another problem to manage? But even as these thoughts tormented me, I held on to one small comfort. Tomorrow, I would go back to Mr. Blackwood's house, where I was treated with dignity and respect, where no one looked at me like I was a burden. I had no idea that tomorrow would be the day everything started to change. The illness started small, just a persistent cough that I attributed to the damp garage and the approaching winter. But by the 3rd week of November, I could barely get through a morning without stopping to catch my breath, and my chest felt heavy, like someone was sitting on it. I was dusting Mr. Blackwood's living room when the coughing fit hit me. It was violent and sudden, doubling me over as I gasped for air. When it finally subsided, I noticed tiny drops of blood on the white cloth in my hand. "Mrs. Patterson?" Mr. Blackwood's voice came from behind me, filled with alarm. I hadn't heard him enter the room. "Good God, are you all right?" I quickly folded the cloth, hiding the blood, and forced another one of those practiced smiles. "Just a little cough, Mr. Blackwood. Nothing serious." But his expression told me he wasn't buying it. His blue eyes were filled with concern as he studied my face, probably noticing what I'd been trying to hide, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my clothes hung looser on my frame each week, the tremor in my hands that came from exhaustion and cold. "Mrs. Patterson, I think you should see a doctor immediately. I'll call my personal physician right now." "No!" The word came out sharper than I intended. I softened my tone quickly. "No, thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I appreciate your concern, but I can't afford to take time off work right now. My family, they're counting on me." His frown deepened. "Mrs. Patterson, your health is more important than work. I'll pay for any time you need to take off, and I'll cover all medical expenses." The kindness in his offer almost broke me completely. I had to turn away, busying myself with dusting the same spot over and over again. That's very generous, but I really can't. Please, I just need to finish my work. That evening, I made the mistake of mentioning to Kala that I wasn't feeling well, hoping she might show even a tiny bit of concern or suggest I rest for a day. Instead, she looked up from her phone with annoyance. Well, you better not be thinking about calling in sick to work. We're already behind on the electric bill, and I'm not covering for you if you decide to be lazy. I'm not being lazy, I said quietly. I think I might have bronchitis or something worse. I've been coughing up blood. Kala's expression didn't change. That's probably just from all the dust at that rich guy's house. Take some cough medicine and stop being dramatic. That night, as I lay shivering on my mattress in the garage, the cough got worse. Each fit left me breathless and dizzy, and the metallic taste in my mouth told me the blood wasn't going away. But I couldn't afford to miss work. Literally couldn't afford it. If I didn't bring home that $600 next Friday, Kala would make my life even more miserable than it already was. The next morning, I could barely stand up. My legs felt weak, and the room spun when I tried to get dressed. But I forced myself to get ready, taking twice as long as usual to button my blouse with shaking fingers. At Mr. Blackwood's house, I tried to work quietly, hoping he wouldn't notice how often I had to stop and rest. But halfway through cleaning his office, another coughing fit hit me. This time, I couldn't hide the blood. Mr. Blackwood appeared in the doorway just as I was trying to clean the spots from his expensive carpet. "That's enough," he said firmly. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now." "Mr. Blackwood, please, I can't afford—" "I don't care what you can afford. You're clearly very sick, and I won't have you collapsing in my home because I was too concerned about propriety to insist you get medical attention." He was already reaching for his phone, probably to call his driver. Panic flooded through me. If I went to the hospital, if I missed work, Kala would be furious. She might even kick me out completely, and then where would I go? "Please," I whispered, and something in my voice made him stop. "Please don't make me go. I can't. My daughter-in-law will be very angry if I miss work. She's counting on my paycheck." Mr. Blackwood stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Mrs. Patterson, how much do you make working here?" $600 a week, I answered honestly. "And where does that money go?" I hesitated. I'd never talked about my personal life with any employer. But something about his gentle tone, the genuine concern in his eyes, made the truth slip out. "I give it to my son and daughter-in-law. They're struggling financially." "All of it?" I nodded, feeling heat creep up my neck in embarrassment. "Mrs. Patterson," he said carefully, "where do you live?" That question I couldn't answer. I looked down at my hands, focusing on a small cut on my knuckle that I'd gotten from the rough edges of a cardboard box in the garage. Mr. Blackwood was quiet for so long that I finally looked up. His expression had changed completely. The polite employer mask was gone, replaced by something deeper, more concerned. "I want you to go home today," he said finally. "Rest. Get better. And I want you to think about whether the people you're giving your money to actually care about your well-being." "Mr. Blackwood, this isn't a request, Mrs. Patterson. You're sick, and you need rest. I'll see you when you're feeling better." I wanted to argue, but another coughing fit seized me and I knew I had no choice. I gathered my things with shaking hands and headed for the bus stop. The ride home felt endless. Each bump in the road sent a spike of pain through my chest, and I found myself gripping the seat to stay upright. By the time I reached my stop, I was dizzy and nauseous. But my real nightmare was waiting for me at home. "What are you doing here?" Kala demanded the moment I walked through the kitchen door. "It's barely noon." "I'm sick," I said simply. "Mr. Blackwood sent me home." Kala's eyes flashed with anger. "Sick? What do you mean sick? You can't be sick, Rosalind. Do you know the Petersons are coming over tonight? I need this house spotless, and I need you to stay in the garage so they don't see you." "Kala, I think I need to see a doctor. I've been coughing up blood." "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped. "You're being completely dramatic. Take some Tylenol and suck it up." Adults don't get to call in sick just because they have a little cough. Before I could respond, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm going shopping for dinner tonight. Make sure this place is clean when I get back, and try not to look so pathetic when the Petersons arrive. The front door slammed, leaving me alone in the house. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, something I usually wasn't allowed to do, and put my head in my hands. How had my life become this? I'd raised Nolan by myself after his father left when he was just 8 years old. I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed my own dreams to make sure he had every opportunity. And this was how he repaid me? By letting his wife treat me like a burden, like an unwanted houseguest in what was supposed to be my family's home? That night, as I listened to Calla laughing with the Petersons through the thin garage walls, talking about her successful online business and their wonderful life together, I realized something had broken inside me, not just physically, though the cough was getting worse, but emotionally. I was dying slowly in this garage, and my own family didn't care enough to notice. What I didn't know was that someone else was starting to notice, someone who had the power to change everything. But first, I had to survive long enough for that change to come. I didn't return to work for 3 days. By the 3rd morning, the cough had developed into something that felt like drowning from the inside out. Every breath was a struggle, and the blood I was coughing up had gotten darker, more frequent. I knew I needed medical attention, but every time I mentioned it to Calla, she dismissed me with increasing irritation. "You're being ridiculous, Rosalind," she said that Wednesday morning as I sat at the kitchen table, too weak to stand for more than a few minutes at a time. "People don't just start dying from a little cough. You're probably just trying to get out of work so you can be lazy." I stared at her in disbelief. "Calla, I can barely breathe. I think I might have pneumonia." She rolled her eyes and continued scrolling through her phone. "Well, if you're so sick, maybe you should move back to your own place so you don't infect the rest of us." The cruelty in her voice shouldn't have surprised me anymore, but it did. "This is supposed to be temporary," I whispered. "You said I could stay until Nolan found a job, yeah. Well, maybe if you weren't such a drain on our resources, we could afford for him to be more selective about his opportunities." I wanted to point out that Nolan spent most of his days playing video games or meeting friends for lunch at restaurants I couldn't afford, but I didn't have the energy to fight. Instead, I retreated to the garage, where the December cold had made my makeshift bedroom feel like a freezer. What I didn't know was that Mr. Blackwood had been trying to reach me. He'd called the house phone twice, but Calla had told him I was out running errands and would call him back. She never gave me the messages. On Thursday evening, something changed in Mr. Blackwood's demeanor. Later, I would learn that he'd grown increasingly worried about my absence and had decided to take matters into his own hands. I was lying on my mattress in the garage, wrapped in every piece of fabric I could find, when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the cracked window, I could see headlights, but they weren't Calla's bright pink car or Nolan's beat-up sedan. This was something expensive, sleek. My heart stopped when I recognized the black Mercedes. Mr. Blackwood. Panic flooded through me. What was he doing here? Had something happened at work? Was he angry that I'd missed so many days? I tried to sit up, but the movement triggered another violent coughing fit that left me gasping and spitting blood into the old towel I'd been using. I heard the car door slam, then footsteps on the gravel driveway. The sound grew fainter as he walked toward the front door of the house. I held my breath, straining to hear what was happening. The doorbell rang, and I heard Calla's muffled voice through the garage wall. She was probably charming him, putting on her sweet act like she did with all the neighbors and visitors. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, light, friendly, completely different from the voice she used with me. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Calla's laugh, followed by, "Oh, she's not here right now. Family emergency, you know how it is. She'll probably be gone for another week or so." She was lying. She was telling Mr. Blackwood that I wasn't here, that I was away dealing with some made-up emergency. Why would she do that? I heard the front door close, and I thought Mr. Blackwood had left. But then something unexpected happened. The car engine didn't start. Instead, I heard footsteps again, but they seemed to be moving around the house rather than back to the car. Through my cracked window, I caught a glimpse of a figure walking slowly along the side of the house, staying in the shadows. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. Mr. Blackwood wasn't leaving. He was investigating. I tried to make myself smaller on the mattress, pulling the thin blanket over my head. What if he found me here? What would he think? How could I possibly explain that I was living like this while working for him every day, pretending everything was fine? The footsteps stopped right outside the garage. I held my breath, praying he would move on. But then I heard something that nearly stopped my heart. A sharp intake of breath, almost like a gasp. Through the crack in the window, Mr. Blackwood was looking directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, but I could see his silhouette frozen in place. He was seeing everything. The mattress on the concrete floor, the pile of blankets that served as my only warmth, the cardboard boxes I used as makeshift furniture, the bucket in the corner that served as my bathroom when the house was locked at night. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. I was paralyzed with shame, and he seemed paralyzed with shock. Then I heard something that broke my heart completely, a sound that was unmistakably crying. Mr. Blackwood, this powerful, successful man who commanded respect in boardrooms and owned companies worth millions, was crying as he looked at how I was living. His hand came up to the window, pressing against the glass as if he wanted to reach through and pull me out of there. I could see him more clearly now, and his face was wet with tears. His mouth was moving, and though I couldn't hear the words, I could read his lips. Oh my God, oh my God. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the concrete floor and never face him again. But then another coughing fit seized me, violent and desperate, and I couldn't muffle the sound. Blood splattered onto the blanket, dark and terrifying in the dim light. Mr. Blackwood stepped back from the window, and I thought he was leaving, disgusted by what he'd seen. But instead, I heard him moving around to the side door of the garage. My heart hammered as I realized he was coming inside. The door creaked open, and suddenly he was there, filling the doorway like an avenging angel. He took in the scene before him, me curled on a filthy mattress, surrounded by the detritus of my broken life. Obviously ill and barely hanging on. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "What in God's name is happening here?" I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, mortified that he was seeing me like this. All pretense was gone now. There was no way to lie. No way to make this look like anything other than what it was. A 65-year-old woman living in conditions that wouldn't be acceptable for an animal. He stepped closer, and I could see the tears still streaming down his face. "How long have you been living like this? Please," I whispered, finding my voice at last. "Please don't fire me. I know this looks bad, but I can explain." "Fire you?" His voice cracked. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to help you. But first, I need to understand what's happening here. That woman who answered the door, she told me you were away on a family emergency." "That's my daughter-in-law, Calla," I managed to say between shallow breaths. She doesn't like visitors knowing I live here." Mr. Blackwood's expression darkened. "Live here? In the garage?" I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "And your son? Where is he in all this?" "He's inside," I said quietly. "He lost his job 3 years ago, and they needed help with expenses. I give them my paycheck every week to help out." "All of it?" "All of it," I confirmed. Mr. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What's happening to you here? This is not help. This is abuse." The word hit me like a physical blow. Abuse. I'd never thought of it that way. These were my family members, my son. Surely they weren't abusing me. They were just struggling. "It's not that simple," I started to say, but he held up his hand. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm 62 years old. I've seen a lot of things in my life, and I know abuse when I see it. You are being exploited, neglected, and mistreated by people who should be protecting you." Another coughing fit seized me, and when it passed, I saw that his face had gone pale at the amount of blood I'd produced. "That's it. he said firmly. You're coming with me right now. We're going to the hospital, and then you're not coming back here. I can't, I protested weakly. They need my paycheck. If I don't work, Mrs. Patterson, he said gently, kneeling down beside my mattress so we were eye level. When was the last time anyone in that house asked how you were feeling? When was the last time they showed concern for your well-being? When was the last time they treated you like a human being instead of a source of income? I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Because the truth was, I couldn't remember. I'm going to take care of you, Mr. Blackwood said, and there was something in his voice that reminded me of the father I'd lost 40 years ago. But first, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Looking into his kind blue eyes, seeing the genuine concern and care there, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. This man, my employer, cared more about my well-being than my own family did. I nodded, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The hospital stay lasted 4 days. Pneumonia, the doctor confirmed, along with severe malnutrition and what he delicately termed signs consistent with prolonged exposure to cold and stress. Mr. Blackwood, Winston, as he insisted I call him now, never left my side except to make mysterious phone calls in the hallway. On the 4th day, as I was finally strong enough to sit up without feeling dizzy, Winston presented me with an offer that seemed too good to be true. "Rosalind," he said, pulling a chair close to my hospital bed, "I have a proposition for you. I own a small guest house on my property. It used to be the groundskeeper's cottage. It's been empty for 2 years since Harold retired. I'd like you to live there." I blinked at him, certain I'd misheard. "I don't understand." "It's fully furnished, has its own kitchen and bathroom, and it's warm." He smiled slightly. "Very warm. I'd also like to increase your responsibilities at the main house. Instead of just housekeeping, I'd like you to manage the entire household, supervising the other staff, managing schedules, handling vendor relationships. The position would come with a salary of $900 per week. $900. I felt faint, and not from the medication. "Winston, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity. This isn't charity, Rosalind. It's a job offer. I've been meaning to hire a household manager for years, but I never found someone I trusted completely. You've worked for me for 4 years with perfect reliability and integrity. You're exactly what I need." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "But what about Nolan and Calla? They're counting on my paycheck." Winston's expression hardened slightly. "Rosalind, your son is 38 years old. If he can't support himself and his wife without exploiting his elderly mother, that's his problem to solve." The word exploiting stung, but I couldn't deny its accuracy anymore. "Think about it," Winston continued. "You'd have your own space, your own income, and you'd be doing work that actually utilizes your intelligence and experience. When was the last time anyone in that house treated you like you mattered?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Calla's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach instantly knotted with anxiety. Winston noticed my reaction and frowned. "Answer it," he said quietly. "I want to hear what she has to say." With trembling fingers, I accepted the call. "Rosalind?" Calla's voice was sharp with irritation. "Where the hell are you? You've been gone for 4 days, and rent is due next week. We need your paycheck." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We were worried." Just demands for money. "I've been in the hospital," I said quietly. "I had pneumonia." "Pneumonia?" Calla's tone suggested she thought I was lying. "Well, how long are you going to milk this? Because we have bills to pay, and your little vacation needs to end." Winston's face had gone dangerously calm as he listened to her side of the conversation. "I'm being discharged today," I said. "But Calla, I need to tell you something. Mr. Blackwood has offered me a position as his household manager, with room and board included." "What?" Calla's voice rose to a near shriek. "You can't do that! We depend on your income! You can't just abandon your family!" "It's not abandoning." "Yes, it is! After everything we've done for you, letting you live with us, this is how you repay us? By running off to play house with some rich old man? I felt my face burn with humiliation, aware that Winston could hear every word. Calla, you made me sleep in the garage. I nearly died from pneumonia because— Oh, don't be so dramatic. The garage was temporary and you know it. You're being completely selfish, Rosalind. What am I supposed to tell Nolan? That his mother abandoned us for money? Winston held out his hand for the phone, and something in his expression made me hand it over without question. Ms. Calla, he said, his voice perfectly polite but with an edge that could cut glass. This is Winston Blackwood, Rosalind's employer. I could hear Calla's voice change immediately, becoming sickeningly sweet. Oh, Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize Rosalind was with you. How wonderful that you visited her in the hospital. Yes. Well, it was quite educational. You see, I had no idea that my employee was living in a garage, suffering from severe illness, while her family collected her entire paycheck. Silence from Calla's end. I've offered Rosalind a position as my household manager, Winston continued smoothly. The job comes with accommodation and a significant salary increase. I'm sure, as her loving family, you'll be happy to know she'll finally be living in conditions suitable for a human being. Now wait just a minute. Calla's voice had turned ugly again. Rosalind has responsibilities to this family. We took her in when she had nowhere else to go. You took her in and made her sleep in an unheated garage while taking her entire paycheck, Winston interrupted, his voice still calm but deadly. I believe the legal term for that arrangement is exploitation of an elderly person. Another silence. Rosalind is a grown woman who can make her own decisions, Winston continued. But I thought you should know that she'll no longer be available as your personal source of income. You'll need to find other arrangements. You can't do this, Calla exploded. She's our family. You can't just steal her away. I'm not stealing anyone. I'm offering employment to someone who has been shamefully mistreated by people who claim to love her. Winston's voice dropped even lower. And if you attempt to harass or intimidate Rosalind in any way, I'll be happy to discuss your treatment of her with the appropriate authorities. He ended the call and handed the phone back to me. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. Winston, I don't know if I can do this. They're my family. No, Rosalind. Family doesn't treat you the way they've been treating you. Family doesn't make you sleep in a garage. Family doesn't take your entire paycheck while you waste away from malnutrition and illness. He was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. What if Nolan really does need the money? What if they lose the house? Winston studied my face carefully. Rosalind, how much do you think Nolan and Calla spend on non-essential items each month? Entertainment, dining out, shopping? I thought about Calla's designer bags, her weekly nail appointments, the expensive dinners they ordered while I ate peanut butter sandwiches. I don't know exactly. I'd guess it's significantly more than $600. They don't need your money to survive. They want it to maintain a lifestyle they can't actually afford. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time it was Nolan. Mom? His voice was strained. Calla told me what happened. You can't seriously be thinking about moving out. Nolan, I nearly died living in that garage. I had pneumonia and no one even— Okay, maybe the garage thing wasn't ideal. But we can figure something else out. Maybe you could take the couch in the living room, or we could set up something in the basement. Not, I'm sorry you were sick. Not, I should have taken better care of you. Just logistics for continued exploitation. Nolan, Mr. Blackwood has offered me a good job with decent accommodation. It's a wonderful opportunity. But what about us, Mom? We've been counting on your help. If you leave, we might lose everything. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, just like it always did. I'd raised Nolan by myself, sacrificed everything for his future, and now he was asking me to sacrifice my health and dignity too. Maybe I could give you part of my new salary, I found myself saying. Not all of it, but something to help. Winston shook his head firmly and held out his hand for the phone again. I hesitated, but something in his expression made me trust him. Nolan, this is Winston Blackwood, he said into the phone. I understand you're concerned about losing your mother's financial support. I could hear Nolan's voice through the speaker, trying to turn on the charm. Mr. Blackwood, sir, I really appreciate you taking care of my mom, but she's been helping us through a rough patch and… Nolan, you're 38 years old. How long exactly did you plan to live off your elderly mother's income? It's not like that, sir. It's just temporary until I can get back on my feet. 3 years is hardly temporary. And making your mother sleep in a garage while you take her entire paycheck. How do you justify that to yourself? The line went quiet. Your mother is moving into proper accommodation and starting a new position with appropriate compensation for someone of her experience and reliability. I suggest you and your wife figure out how to support yourselves like other adults your age. Winston ended the call and looked at me with gentle but firm eyes. Rosalind, you raised that boy and gave him every advantage you could. Your job as his mother is done. It's time to start taking care of yourself. As I lay back against the hospital pillows, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, I felt safe. Winston wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a chance to remember what it felt like to be treated with dignity and respect. The hardest part would be believing I deserved it. The guest house was like stepping into a fairy tale. Hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting, and the kitchen was small but perfectly appointed with everything I could need. The bedroom had a real bed with clean sheets and a thick comforter, and the bathroom had a deep tub that I spent my first evening soaking in, letting the warmth penetrate bones that had been cold for too long. For 2 weeks, I lived in blissful peace. Winston had been right. My new role as household manager utilized skills I'd forgotten I had. I coordinated with the gardening service, managed the cleaning schedule for the main house, and even helped Winston organize his home office. He treated me as a professional equal, asking for my input on household decisions and respecting my judgment. I should have known it wouldn't last. On a Tuesday afternoon, as I was reviewing invoices at the kitchen table in the main house, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I recognized Nolan's beat-up sedan. My stomach immediately knotted with anxiety. Winston was in his office on a conference call, so I went to answer the door myself. But when I opened it, it wasn't just Nolan standing there. Calla was with him, and she looked furious. "Mom," Nolan said, and his voice carried a tone I remembered from his teenage years when he'd been caught doing something wrong. "We need to talk." "Hello, Nolan." "Calla." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "What are you doing here?" "We're here to bring you home," Calla announced, pushing past me into Winston's foyer like she owned the place. "This little tantrum has gone on long enough." "This isn't a tantrum," I said quietly. "I'm working. I live here now." Nolan looked around the elegant entryway, his eyes wide. "Mom, this is incredible. But you can't just abandon your family. We've been struggling without your help." The guilt hit me immediately, just like it always did. "Nolan, I'm sorry you're having financial difficulties, but…" "Sorry?" Calla's voice rose to a near shriek. "You're sorry? We're about to lose the house because you decided to run off and play house with some rich old man." "That's enough." Winston's voice came from the top of the stairs, calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. He descended slowly, his presence filling the space. "I don't believe we were introduced properly. I'm Winston Blackwood, and this is my home." Nolan immediately straightened, trying to look respectable. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, I'm Nolan Patterson, Rosalind's son. I really appreciate everything you've done for my mother, but we need her to come home now. Do you?" Winston's tone was perfectly polite, but there was something underneath it that made me think of ice. "And why is that?" "Because she's family," Calla interjected, stepping forward with that fake smile she used when she wanted something. "We've been taking care of her for years, and now she needs to come home and fulfill her responsibilities." I saw Winston's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Taking care of her? Is that what you call making her sleep in an unheated garage while taking her entire paycheck?" Calla's mask slipped for just a moment. "That's not. We were going through a temporary rough patch. The garage was just until we could figure out something better. For 3 years?" Winston's voice was deadly quiet. "Look, Mr. Blackwood," Nolan jumped in, trying to regain control of the conversation. I know the situation wasn't perfect, but Mom understands that family has to stick together. She's always been willing to help out when we needed it. Help out? Winston repeated. Your mother was giving you $600 a week, her entire salary, while living in conditions that wouldn't be acceptable for an animal. That's not helping out. That's exploitation. I could see Calla getting more agitated, her face turning red. You don't understand our family dynamic. Rosalind has always been dramatic about everything. The garage wasn't that bad, and she knew it was temporary. I see. Winston's tone remained calm. And what about her pneumonia? Was that dramatic too? She's always been prone to getting sick, Calla said dismissively. She's just not very strong. Something in Winston's expression changed, becoming harder. Mrs. Patterson, would you mind if I shared some information with your son and daughter-in-law? I looked at him uncertainly, not sure what he meant. When I took Rosalind to the hospital, Winston continued, addressing Nolan directly, the doctor said her condition was consistent with prolonged malnutrition and exposure to cold. She was severely underweight, anemic, and showing signs of hypothermia. He asked me if she was homeless. I saw Nolan flinch at that. The doctor was shocked when I told him she was living with family, Winston went on. He said he'd never seen elderly abuse that severe outside of cases involving addiction or mental illness. Elderly abuse? Nolan's voice cracked. That's not. We weren't abusing her. We needed help. You needed help so badly that you couldn't afford to heat the space where your mother slept? You couldn't afford to feed her properly? But you could afford to take her entire paycheck every week? Calla stepped forward aggressively. Now you listen here, Mr. High and Mighty. You don't know anything about our situation. Rosalind chose to help us. Nobody forced her. Nobody forced her? Winston's voice was getting dangerously quiet. Mrs. Patterson, did you choose to sleep in the garage, or were you told that's where you had to sleep? I felt all their eyes on me, and for a moment I was back to being that frightened woman who just wanted everyone to get along. But then I remembered the warmth of my new home, the respect Winston showed me, the way I'd been able to hold my head up with dignity for the past 2 weeks. I was told that's where I had to sleep, I said quietly. Calla said she needed my room for her office. And did you choose to give them your entire paycheck? Or were you told that's what good family members do? I was told it was my responsibility, I admitted. Calla's face was getting redder. Rosalind, how can you say that? We never forced you to do anything. You offered to help. I offered to help temporarily, I said, finding my voice getting stronger. You told me it would just be until Nolan found another job. That was 3 years ago. Jobs are hard to find, Nolan protested. The economy is tough, and the economy is tough for everyone, Winston interjected. But most people don't solve their financial problems by exploiting their elderly parents. We weren't exploiting her, Calla shouted. We gave her a place to live. A garage, Winston said flatly. You gave her a garage. While you and your husband lived comfortably in the house her money was helping to pay for. The room fell silent except for Calla's heavy breathing. I could see her trying to find another angle, another way to manipulate the situation. Fine, she said finally, her voice turning cold and calculating. If that's how Rosalind wants to play it, then fine. But don't come crying to us when your rich boyfriend here gets tired of you and throws you out. Don't expect us to take you back. The threat was meant to terrify me, and a month ago it would have. But now, looking at the venom in her eyes, I realized something important. I wasn't losing a loving family by standing up for myself. I was escaping people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. I won't come back, I said quietly but firmly. Because this isn't about Mr. Blackwood. This is about me finally realizing that I deserve better than sleeping in a garage while people who claim to love me take everything I have. Nolan's face crumpled. Mom, you don't mean that. We're your family. Family doesn't treat each other this way, Nolan. Family doesn't take advantage of each other. Family doesn't let each other get sick and alone and desperate. But what about us? He pleaded. What are we supposed to do? The question that had controlled me for 3 years suddenly sounded different. What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to figure out how to support themselves like every other adult couple in the world. "You're supposed to take care of yourselves," I said. "The way I've been taking care of myself since your father left when you were 8. The way I took care of both of us for 30 years without asking anyone else to sacrifice their dignity and health." Winston stepped closer to me, a show of support that didn't go unnoticed by any of us. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said to Nolan and Calla. "Mrs. Patterson has made her position clear, and you're no longer welcome on my property." Calla's mask finally dropped completely. "You're going to regret this, Rosalind. Both of you. When people find out what kind of woman abandons her own son for money, when they find out what kind of man steals mothers away from their families, that's enough." Winston's voice cut through her threats like a blade. "You need to leave. Now." Nolan grabbed Calla's arm, probably recognizing that they'd crossed a line they couldn't come back from. "Come on, Calla. Let's go." At the door, Nolan turned back to me one more time. "Mom, I love you. This doesn't have to be permanent. When you come to your senses—" "I already have," I said softly. "I've come to my senses." As their car pulled out of the driveway, Winston gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, expecting to feel guilty or sad or scared. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. "I feel free," I said. And for the first time in 3 years, I smiled without having to force it. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my little guest house preparing dinner for 2. The evening light streamed through windows that I now kept open without fear of cold, and the house was filled with the warm scents of roast chicken and fresh herbs from the garden I'd started behind the cottage. Winston had become more than an employer. He'd become the family I'd never really had. We shared dinner twice a week, and he'd taken to asking my advice on matters far beyond household management. When his daughter called from overseas, he'd tell her about the wonderful woman who was helping him organize his life. And when business associates visited, he introduced me as his invaluable household manager, with a pride that still made me blush. The changes in my life were remarkable. My health had improved dramatically once I was eating regular, nutritious meals and sleeping in a warm, comfortable bed. I'd gained 15 pounds, healthy weight that filled out my face and made me look years younger. Winston had insisted I see his personal physician, who'd prescribed vitamins and medications that addressed the damage from years of poor nutrition and stress. More importantly, I'd rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I was good at managing people and organizing systems. Winston often told me that his household had never run more efficiently, and he'd given me 2 raises without my asking. I now earned $1,100 a week, more money than I'd ever made in my life, and every penny was mine to keep. I'd used some of that money to buy new clothes, not expensive designer items like Calla favored, but well-made, comfortable pieces that fit properly and made me feel dignified. I'd also purchased a small car, nothing fancy, but reliable transportation that meant I wasn't dependent on anyone else. But the most significant change was the return of my self-worth. For 3 years, I'd been told I was a burden, a drain, someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness came my way. Now I woke up each morning knowing I was valued, respected, and genuinely cared for. I hadn't heard from Nolan or Calla since that confrontation 6 months ago, and I was surprised to find that the silence was a relief rather than a source of pain. Winston had been right. They hadn't loved me. They'd used me. Real love doesn't come with conditions and demands and sleeping in garages. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and went to answer it, expecting to find Winston arriving for our weekly dinner. Instead, I found Nolan standing on my porch, looking older and more haggard than I remembered. His clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. "Hello, Mom," he said quietly. For a moment, I felt that old familiar tug of worry and guilt. He looked so tired, so defeated. But then I remembered the last 6 months, how peaceful they'd been, how much my health had improved, how good it felt to be treated with dignity. "Hello, Nolan. What brings you here?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at my little cottage, the flower boxes in the windows, the small car in the driveway. "You look good, Mom. Really good. I feel good. How are you?" His face crumpled slightly. "Not so great, if I'm being honest. Calla and we separated 2 months ago." I felt a flash of sympathy, but it was tempered by the memory of how they'd both treated me. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Yeah, well." He ran a hand through his hair. "Turns out when you can't afford to maintain a certain lifestyle, some people lose interest in the relationship." I studied his face, seeing the pain there but also recognizing something else, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "Mom, can I come in? I'd like to talk to you." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him enter. He looked around the small living room with wonder, taking in the comfortable furniture, the warm lighting, the books on the shelves. "This is really nice, Mom. You've made it beautiful. Thank you. Would you like some coffee? That would be great." As I prepared coffee in the kitchen, I could feel him watching me. When I joined him in the living room with 2 steaming mugs, he was sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "And before you say anything, I know an apology doesn't fix anything. I know it's probably too little, too late. But I needed you to know that I understand now how badly I messed up." I sipped my coffee and waited for him to continue. "After you left, things fell apart pretty quickly. Without your money coming in, we couldn't afford the lifestyle Calla was used to." She got more and more resentful, blaming me for not being able to provide for her the way you had been providing for both of us. He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "It took her leaving for me to realize that she'd been manipulating both of us. She'd convinced me that you were being dramatic about the garage, that you were exaggerating how cold it was, or how uncomfortable it was. She said you were just trying to make us feel guilty, and you believed her." "I wanted to believe her," he admitted, "because if I believed her, then I didn't have to face the fact that I was letting my mother live like a homeless person while I took her money." The honesty in his voice surprised me. This wasn't the defensive, entitled man who'd stood in Winston's foyer 6 months ago. "Nolan," I said gently, "why didn't you ever come check on me in the garage? Even once?" His face flushed with shame. "Because I knew if I saw how you were really living, I'd have to do something about it. And I wasn't ready to give up the money. I wasn't ready to take responsibility for my own life." At least he was being honest. "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But I wanted you to know that I've gotten a job, a real job, 40 hours a week at a manufacturing plant. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work and decent pay. And I've rented a small apartment that I can actually afford. That's good, Nolan. I'm proud of you for taking responsibility. I'm not telling you this because I want anything from you," he continued quickly. "I know you're happy here, and you should be. You deserve to be treated well. I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I put you through." "Like?" We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I found myself really looking at my son for the first time in years. Without Calla's influence, without the entitlement and demands, I could see glimpses of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to help me carry groceries and who'd told me he loved me every night before bed. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "Anything. Do you remember when you were 12 and you had pneumonia? I sat up with you for 3 nights straight, taking your temperature, making sure you could breathe, sleeping in the chair next to your bed because I was so worried about you." Nolan's eyes filled with tears. "I remember. When I had pneumonia, living in that garage, did you even know I was sick?" He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, tears were streaming down his face. "No, I didn't know. I didn't pay attention. I was so focused on my own problems that I didn't even see that my mother was dying right in front of me." The admission hung between us, painful but necessary. "I can't go back and change it," he continued, his voice breaking. "I can't give you back those 3 years. I can't undo the damage, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm horrified by it." I felt tears stinging my own eyes, not from sadness, but from something closer to relief. This was what I'd needed to hear, not promises to do better, not excuses or justifications, but acknowledgement of the truth. "I forgive you, Nolan," I said quietly. "But I won't forget, and I won't let it happen again." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I wouldn't expect you to. I wouldn't want you to." We talked for another hour, and it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. He told me about his job, his small apartment, the therapy he'd started to understand how he'd become the kind of person who could exploit his own mother. I told him about my work with Winston, about how good it felt to be valued and respected. When he got up to leave, he paused at the door. "Mom, do you think, maybe sometime, we could have dinner together? Not here," he added quickly. "I know this is your safe space. Maybe at a restaurant or something. I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with you, if you're willing. A real relationship this time, based on mutual respect." I considered his request carefully. The old me would have said yes immediately, desperate to maintain any connection with my son. But the new me, the me who'd learned to value herself, needed to think about what I actually wanted. "I'd like that," I said finally. "But we take it slow, and if you ever try to manipulate me or take advantage of me again, I'll cut you out of my life permanently. I won't give you another chance after this one." "I understand. And Mom, thank you for giving me even this much. I know I don't deserve it." As I watched him drive away, I felt something I'd never expected. Hope for my son. Not hope that he'd change back into the dependent man-child who'd needed my money, but hope that he'd continue becoming the responsible adult he was finally starting to be. Winston knocked on my door 20 minutes later, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing his usual gentle smile. "I saw a car in your driveway," he said as I let him in. "Everything all right?" "My son came to see me," I said. "To apologize." Winston raised his eyebrows. "And how do you feel about that?" I thought about it as I served our dinner, considering the question seriously. "Cautiously optimistic," I said finally. "He seems to understand what he did wrong, but it'll take time to rebuild trust." "That seems very wise," Winston said. "You've become quite good at protecting yourself." As we ate dinner together, talking about our respective days, I marveled at how completely my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been sleeping in a garage, slowly dying from neglect and exploitation. Now I had a beautiful home, meaningful work, and people in my life who genuinely cared about my well-being. I thought about the woman I'd been before, always giving, always sacrificing, always putting everyone else's needs before my own. That woman had been good and kind, but she'd also been a victim. This new version of myself was still good and kind, but she was also strong. She knew her worth. She wouldn't accept less than she deserved. After Winston left that evening, I sat on my small porch, looking out over the gardens he'd encouraged me to plant. The night was warm and peaceful, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city. I thought about Nolan's visit, about his genuine remorse and his efforts to change. I hoped he would continue on this path, but I also knew that his choices were his responsibility, not mine. I'd done my job raising him. Now my job was taking care of myself. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from the obligation to sacrifice myself for others. Free from the fear of being alone. Free from the belief that my worth was measured by how much I could give. I was 66 years old, and I was finally learning how to live. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.